What's going on, guys? It's fight season MMA, and today I want to talk about Khamzat Chimaev. This man just won the title off Dricus Du Plessis at UFC 319 in a very interesting fight, landing over 500 strikes in that one, where only 30 or so or 40 or so were significant in that fight, which is an absolutely crazy stat. But Khamzat Chimaev is the next middleweight champion, and he is someone who is going out there and he is going to want to reign over this division, possibly become a double and triple champion, and I think he could possibly do that, but the next step for him is defending his title. And who could he defend it against? And that's who we're going to talk about today. When is Khamzat's timeline to come back to the UFC? He wanted to fight at UFC 321, and the odds of that are decreasingly more probably going to happen. I don't think that fight's going to go down, and we are going to talk about everything today, who Khamzat should fight next, what the UFC middleweight landscape is going to be, and we're going to talk about everything in between. If you guys enjoy the UFC content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That is the best way to help the channel grow. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications, just so you guys can always help this channel grow. But without further ado, let's jump right into the video talking about Khamzat Chimaev, who he's going to fight next in the current middleweight landscape. So the UFC middleweight division is in a very interesting landscape right now. We got Khamzat Chimaev, who is the new middleweight champion, Dricus Du Plessis, who just fought for the belt, and a bunch of other contender fights going on. But first off, I want to talk about, is there anyone who could beat Chimaev in the UFC middleweight division, and when would this fight happen? So Chimaev wants to come back at UFC 321, which would be a very, very, very quick turnaround for him. That fight is going down at the end of October, or that card is going down at the end of October, headlined by Aspinall and Cyril Gane. But Chimaev most likely isn't going to get that fight unless if it's a Dricus Du Plessis rematch, when in reality we do not want to see that fight. Now, Khamzat Chimaev could fight the likes of Sean Strickland or Israel Adesanya immediately. Now, both of those guys are both coming off losses. Sean Strickland is on a 1-loss streak, and Israel Adesanya is on a 2-loss streak. Strickland's loss was to DDP, and Adesanya's loss was to DDP and Nasruddin Imavov. Now, when I'm looking at those two individuals, I think Khamzat ragdolls everyone inside the middleweight division, to be honest. I don't think that there's a single person who could go up there and beat Khamzat Chimaev. Now, there's guys who could do better than others, but we'll get into that a little bit later in the video. But Khamzat Chimaev is going to be such a dominant middleweight champion, it's not even funny due to that wrestling that he possesses. And really looking at who could be his next opponent, it's very interesting the layout of the land. We all know that this fight between Nasruddin Imavov and Caio Borralho is one of the most anticipated fights of the year for the middleweight division, considering that it is the number 2 contender versus the number 7 contender. Two guys who are on some crazy win streaks, two guys who absolutely have been tearing it up inside the UFC and have a couple similar wins between the two individuals, but that is going to be a very big fight to determine championship implications as well. Last night there was a booking between two top 6 middleweights, the number 5 and number 6 middleweight. Reinier de Ridder is going to be defending his spot against Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, who fought 2 weeks ago, and this is going down at UFC Vancouver in October. That's going to be an incredible fight to be had. That's just under or just over 2 months away, probably about 2 months on the dot, but these two guys, absolute studs inside the middleweight division. Some of the weirdest fighters out there. You got Reinier de Ridder, who has almost Dricus-like plot armor. Doesn't look like he should win any fight. And Reinier de Ridder, who fights like a mini Cain Velasquez. But really, when I'm looking at all this, what I think is going to go down is Khamzat is going to be held from performing on the UFC 321 card. Not saying he couldn't fight someone like Israel Adesanya. He couldn't fight someone like, Sean Strickland. There just isn't that many deserving contenders right now. Brendan Allen just beat Marvin Vettori. He's not deserving. Robert Whittaker lost his last 2 fights, one to Khamzat and one to Reinier de Ridder. And really, other than that, everyone else is booked. So Chimaev is going to have to wait a little bit longer, and that is something that I really am very interested to see, because I do think the next logical matchup is going to be having Sean Strickland fight Israel Adesanya. It just makes a lot of sense in the top kind of part of that division, considering that those individuals want to fight one another again. And Dricus Du Plessis kind of put in a holding pattern right now. There's not a very intelligent person or really logical person to allow Dricus Du Plessis to fight, but one of Nasruddin Imavov, Caio Borralho, Reinier de Ridder, or Anthony Hernandez is going to get the next title shot against Khamzat. I think you do the winner of one of those 2 fights, the person who doesn't get the title shot, fight Dricus Du Plessis. Makes a lot of sense. Possibly a number 1 contender bout. Makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, to do it like that. But Khamzat Chimaev is going to go out there and ragdoll every single person inside these divisions, except two, I believe. One of those being Reinier de Ridder and the other one being Anthony Hernandez, just because they can grapple a little bit more. His easiest fight out of the four guys in these two fights is Nassourdine Imavov. He is the worst on the ground between these two guys. Now, the reason I say Hernandez and Reinier de Ridder are going to be a little bit more difficult, not saying they're going to be some crazy challenge, but Khamzat Chimaev is just such an elite wrestler, and those guys have a wrestling pedigree to them to where they could be able to withstand some part of Chimaev on the ground. Now, I'm not saying they can go out there and win the fight on the ground. They're going to have to do it in a different way, but I don't think Chimaev should be this crazy, like 7-1 favorite against those guys. I think Chimaev should be like a -250 for both of those fights. I do think that they're very even. I think that this fight going down in Vancouver is one of the most interesting fights you can make inside the middleweight division, but Fluffy Hernandez is on an absolute tear coming up, and I genuinely do think that he is one of the best contenders right now, and one of the best stylistic matchups to fight Chimaev coming up here in his first title defense. And genuinely, I do think that also Reinier de Ridder is going to be a very tough out for Khamzat as well. I see Khamzat submitting both of these guys. I see Khamzat submitting all of these guys, truly, in a very star-studded performance for Chimaev himself. But when do we expect this to happen? And I think the biggest thing that we're looking at is the new Paramount deal that the UFC just signed for $7 billion. This is going to allow all the different UFC promotions and fights to be streamed on Paramount Plus, which is a very new and very cool thing, considering that we have to pay so much money on ESPN Plus to get the subscription to even allow us to pay for the pay-per-view cards, which are about $70 to $80 each, depending on when you buy them. Now Paramount Plus is allowing easier access for UFC fans to gain and watch their content, but Chimaev, I think, is going to be saved for one of the first two cards. It only makes a lot of sense to do it like that. Possibly the first card could be Ilia Topuria. I think that that's going to be a very interesting one. Wait for him to fight as one of the most exciting fighters inside the UFC right now. Do a fight where you have, I don't know, maybe Ilia Topuria versus Paddy Pimblett, or Ilia Topuria versus Justin Gaethje for the first ever Paramount Plus card. Do something like Alexander Volkanovski versus Lerone Murphy to end the year. Makes a lot of sense in my book, but genuinely, I think that Chimaev is going to be saved for one of these absolutely massive cards just because of the stardom that he possesses. I do think that Chimaev is going to have a very interesting fight with these guys. They're all dangerous, and I don't want to get that wrong, but Chimaev is just on a different level. Even though I don't believe his fight with Dricus Du Plessis was that impressive, Chimaev was still incredibly dominant in that fight in a way that he was able to control positions. He made Dricus look like an amateur out there, and genuinely, Chimaev is one of the best wrestlers we have ever seen inside the UFC, and I want to give him credit there because he deserves it. Being able to beat an older Kamaru Usman, who still looks like he's near his prime after that Joaquin Buckley fight, but Chimaev being able to beat Usman, him being able to beat Robert Whittaker, him being able to beat DDP, he has a very underrated legacy and resume coming to his name very close here in the next couple of weeks. But Khamzat Chimaev is going to be a very dominant middleweight champion. I don't know how long he's going to be a middleweight champion, considering that he might want to fight at light heavyweight. He tried to go down to welterweight. He could even beat someone like Cyril Gane at heavyweight, I believe. But Khamzat Chimaev is so dominant. He's going to have either Nassourdine Imavov, Caio Borralho, Reinier de Ridder, or Anthony Hernandez in their next fight. If I had to guess, I think it's going to be Caio Borralho, but I am not 100% sure. That fight is coming off the earliest out of anyone, and that makes a lot of sense in my opinion to do that one. And if it's not, I think it's going to be Anthony Hernandez, because I think he's going to go out there and beat Reinier de Ridder. If you had to guess who wins those two fights, I think I have Caio Borralho over Nassourdine Imavov, as well as Anthony Hernandez over Reinier de Ridder. But ultimately, Khamzat Chimaev is one of the most unstoppable forces we have ever seen in the UFC. He's such a good fighter and genuinely possesses so many different facets to his game that allow him to be one of the best wrestlers and just an absolute nightmare for anyone to fight. And I genuinely think that he's going to be a middleweight champion for a very long time, unless if he vacates the belt to move to another division. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA. And if you guys could, in the comment section down below, put on your fighter matchmaking caps to give me how you guys would have the future of the UFC middleweight division playing out. Obviously, Dricus Du Plessis, Khamzat Chimaev, Israel Adesanya, and Sean Strickland don't have fights, and Imavov is fighting Borralho, and Hernandez is fighting de Ridder. You got guys like Robert Whittaker, Brendan Allen, Michael Venom Page, Jared Cannonier. There's not a lot of guys who are fighting inside the middleweight division right now, but the top part of the division is booked. It's absolutely stacked, and it's very intriguing for a long time coming forward. But as I've said, Khamzat Chimaev is one of the most dominant UFC champions that we have seen in a very long time. And I do think that even though I don't believe his performance against Dricus was that truly impressive as everyone is making it out to be, he still had an incredibly dominant performance in that fight. And I do think that he can go out there and become one of the most dominant UFC middleweight champions the UFC has ever seen. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA. And please let me know what you think down below in the comment section about this video and about future videos you would want to see from me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.